I never thought I'd ask this, but do we have an Excel addiction? How can we make sense of the spreadsheet crutch and what it says about the other tools we're supposed to be using at work, but we're not? That's why my guest this week is Al Chen. Al is the founder of KeyCut, an Excel training and consulting company to Fortune 500 companies. He writes the LinkedIn newsletter titled Dear Analyst with over 16,000 subscribers, as well as hosts a podcast under the same name where he discusses workplace tools, spreadsheets, data analysis, and everything in between. I'm excited for this conversation. It's going to be a good one. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. Whether you are totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for the robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guest to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay, the lady engineer. I am a pragmatic futurist and human-first technologist, serial entrepreneur, and innovation consultant. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of the spreadsheet crutch. Al, how are you? Welcome.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
This is exciting. I never thought I'd be this excited about Excel, but I actually have been talking about this like all week. It's been Passover at Seder's. And I mentioned it in my newsletter, and a few people replied and were like, I caught Excel at the bottom and start sharing their stories. So um, we're going to start with our first segment, Crystal Ball, what does the future hold? And then we'll jump into the Excel conversation. So in Crystal Ball, I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, they tell us their hot take. I'm going to offer some predictions, and Al, I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen, or yes, that is happening, or
hmm
no, please, no, or no, that's not happening this year. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So the first one is hyper-personalization becomes the norm. So this is a continuation of a 2023 prediction around renewed focus on tracking technologies, but this ups the ante by saying it becomes the norm. Are customers demanding that companies, meet them where they are, or are they still wary of privacy concerns? And are big companies ready to offer hyper-personalization?
Um, I say yes. Do you want me to give me? Do you want me to give you some background on why? Or
Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
Well, I mean, I think personalization has been around since the internet kind of came about, with banner ads, and then Google AdWords, and I think in terms of the privacy stuff, like I think most people who are netizens of the world, like they're kind of like comfortable with just you already have all my information. My information has been sold like 10 times over, so privacy is kind of like I don't know what does that really mean, unless you really care about not being tracked or whatever. But I think most people are like, I already know I'm being tracked. I'm giving up on that game. So maybe at the very least, I can get some really nice targeted ads, like we see on Instagram, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think it's just going to be the hyper personalization is going to continue and continue.
Seems like you're specifically talking about advertising, and I'm wondering if like the average kind of Fortune 500 company can offer hyper personalization in their digital experiences as well, not just advertising.
Well, I think if the company can't, there's many agencies, consultants, and partners that can do it for you, since they're all up to date
Yeah,
on the latest uh, targeting and uh, personalization
right.
technologies. So I think for a Fortune 500 who is not doing it, it's like I'm sure there's people internally within like the innovation department, for instance, who are saying we have to do this. We'll find a way to make our products and services targeted towards our target customers.
Yeah, right. Okay, next one. Better AI guardrails and encryption for customer data. So, with the end of third party cookies, companies must adopt new strategies for collecting data, emphasizing encryption and transparency, while also navigating privacy regulations. So, they will prioritize secure data storage. Do you think they will?
I'm gonna say no. For me, I think a lot of companies are. It's it's like important, but probably there's more pressing issues in terms of like keeping our profits up, making sure our shareholders are happy. And I feel like things relating to security and privacy, unfortunately, fall to the wayside. Um,
Yeah, I think that's
Having said
fair.
that, you want to avoid being. When I was in business school, the first thing one of our professors told us was like the first thing you should think about in terms of like ethics and whatever is like not having your face or your company on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so there's still
Right.
some risk you have to think about and mitigating these privacy issues. But I think when push comes to shove and you have quarterly earnings, like it's all about how do we make sure we boost shareholder value.
Right. It's like security on a list of the 10 priorities for the year. Security might be five, six.
Right. Yep.
Right. Okay. Final one. Data comprehension will get priority over data accumulation. So the demand for actionable insights grows considering how much data companies do have. Will organizations prioritize understanding over accumulation?
This is right down my wheelhouse. I'm glad you asked this prediction. I've been saying this for the last decade, I'd say, and how it gets internally prioritized, we'll see how that works out organization by organization. But I think we're seeing a lot of companies get all this data and people don't know what to do with it, except for the data engineers and the data scientists. And so there is definitely an effort to make everyone in the company data fluent, learning how to use dashboards, learning how to use Excel, learning how to use spreadsheets, maybe learning how to use SQL. So that
Yeah.
will continue because it can't just be in the hands of a few people, data scientists, data engineers in the company who know how to use this data. Um, so I think the perfect example I like to give is the New York Times. They literally have a boot camp that they give internally that's 2-3 days for journalists to take to learn how to use Google Sheets, Excel, and to basically help them tell better data driven stories. And the New York Times realized a lot of their journalists don't have this data background. So they have this 2 to 3 day boot camp, which I think was all created internally. They didn't hire like a separate training company to do this.
They didn't hire
They didn't
you.
hire me, but I've seen their materials, I've seen their content, and it's really good.
Yeah, I think that that's awesome. And thanks for giving that example. I think I often, one, kind of divide having data from knowing information,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have a lot of data, but some of it's sitting in really like old databases and really don't know how to like parse and act on it. So there's that kind of understanding that I think when I think about my privacy concerns, sometimes I'm not that concerned because I think most companies have this data but don't know how to do anything with
Right.
it. So it's just sitting
Yeah.
there,
It's
right?
sitting in
It's just
some
sitting
old
there.
database. Maybe it's sitting on someone's like old PC somewhere. And the chances of it being kind of like put into usable format is like very small. So you're right. There probably is
It's very
a little
small.
risk there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the only reason why I think personalization, the hyper personalization becoming the norm might be difficult for some companies is because they don't understand. They don't do anything with all the data they have.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So before we kick off with Tell Me Something I Don't Know, I want to make a quick announcement. If you are new to Make Sense, I prepared a list of the top 10 clips from the first 30 episodes. So dive into the most insightful clips without having to watch full episodes by visiting lindsayt.com/ms top 10. That's lindsayt.com/ms top 10. That will be in the show notes. So that brings us to our next segment. This week's Tell Me Something I Don't Know headline. Al, Ars Technica reports that the Formula One chief is appalled to find team is using Excel to manage 20,000 car parts. Are you surprised?
100% no. Not surprised whatsoever.
Right. I don't think anyone should be a surprised. Appalled is okay though. Like
Oh
Appalled,
yeah, yeah.
not
Not surprised.
surprised.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I've like, I don't know if you've like follow Hacker News at all, but every
Sometimes.
month or so, there's like a post about like, oh, this new tool that's supposed to replace Excel, and oh, Excel will never die or something like that. And there's like some interesting article about it. And Hacker News, as you most know, is mostly like engineers and technical people who are
Hmm.
writing and commenting. And every time I read the comments on one of these articles, there's always someone who's like, hey guys, I work for a Fortune 100, Fortune 50 company. You won't believe how much of our company runs on Excel. And so it's like
Yeah.
kind of scary knowing that like the top companies in the world are still relying on like this program from 1970, and it's like on someone's PC desktop PC. And
Right.
it's just funny because every time I see those comments, I'm like, Excel is never going to die. And seeing this Formula
Yeah.
F1 um, crew chief, whatever, saying they use Excel, like, it's not surprising whatsoever.
Right. So, for everyone listening, the Excel workbook at Formula One contains 20,000 car parts. It lacked crucial information such as cost, production time, and order status, which led to lots of inefficiencies and errors. They're going to have to transition to a modern tracking system. It's going to be costly. It's going to require significant effort, um, despite some resistance from the team. And even though the brand has this high tech image, the reliance on Excel for crucial proper processes, like as Al was saying, does reflect broader trends in organizational IT.
Yep. And
Yeah.
people obviously care about this issue a lot. I mean, if you look at the article, there's like over 200 comments from the Ars Technica
Wow.
community. And there's, I think the reason why this is such a interesting story is because you have people saying like, oh, they shouldn't have used Excel, it's IT's fault. And there are other people who are saying, which I'm more in the camp of, well, Excel is so easy to use. Of course, this person picked up Excel to manage their race car. So you have these two kind of
It's
camps fighting at each other, and the right answer is that no one's right.
so it's both.
Mm-hmm.
It's both bad IT and or slow IT, and also how comfortable everyone is
Yep.
with the spreadsheet.
Right.
Right. So I told you before we pressed play, I mentioned that I was doing this podcast on Excel, and a bunch of people on my email list replied with their own comments. And my friend Neil, he brought up this term called shadow IT.
Mm-hmm.
So things that, yeah, these technical processes that end up getting overtaken by Excel, and then the data becomes in the system is incorrect because everything's in the Excel spreadsheet. The original source is not edited and updated, but that this is a result of IT being too slow or onerous or backlogged. So workers need a workaround. They can't wait for their IT ticket to get serviced. So they just export CSV from whatever system they're using and move on with their day, and just causes a lot of problems. So I like the term shadow
Mm-hmm.
IT.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that applies
so
to kind of any tool or software you pick up within your company. Maybe you're really good at using, example, I use Canva a lot these days over PowerPoint or Google Slides. And so I can pick it up, use it because I want to make a quick slide or a quick visualization. And our IT department doesn't approve of this tool, but I can use it for free. It creates something I need and it's useful for my company. But it's not blessed, so to speak, by IT. So this doesn't apply just to spreadsheets. It can apply to any type of tool that you're using within your company.
yeah,
Yep.
if you have to wait and you don't want to wait, we're like water. Hopefully, we're gonna find the easiest
The
path to
path of
flow.
least resistance.
So
Yeah.
that leads yeah, that leads us into our third segment, deep dive. In this segment, we get into the details about a specific technology's implications for everyday people. And Al, I'd like to talk about the spreadsheet crutch more.
Mhm.
So, the spreadsheet was meant for financial analysis, not for managing projects. How do you think we grew this over reliance on spreadsheets?
I mean, I think the over reliance really just comes down to similar to this Formula One example is like it's already installed on everyone's computer. Your company probably has Microsoft Office, and you're used to using Word. And if someone sends you and emails you an Excel file, you're probably going to open it up in an Excel. You're not going to open it up in like numbers or something like that. And
Right.
I think again, we just talked about the path of least resistance. Just do whatever's easiest. It's just easy to open it up because it's already on your computer. So I think that's the main
Right.
reason that we rely on it too much. And to speak about like using Excel outside of financial analysis, like because it's so easy to use, because it's so approachable, people over the years have figured out, oh, I can use this for more than just creating a financial model. I can use it to manage projects. I can use it to
Mm-hmm.
manage an event. I can use it to plan a wedding. It's just like this
Mm-hmm.
overarching tool once you know the building blocks of a spreadsheet or of Excel.
Right. The funny thing is so I know, you know, we can say spreadsheet, but we're really talking about Excel because Microsoft is baked into most large corporations at this
Right.
point. So you've got it on your desktop. It's just funny because in conversation with others about what they use Excel for besides financial analysis, some things you mentioned like project management and also like databases, housing product, housing inventory. Microsoft has products for those specific duties,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is Microsoft Access for databases. There is Microsoft Project for Gantt
Mm-hmm.
charts. Uh, do you think those projects are just not as intuitive? Products are not as intuitive as Excel, or it's just again just going right back. It's a crutch, just going to what you're comfortable with.
I think it's a mix of not not being intuitive to use compared to Excel, and
Hmm.
also just like you're not used to it. I think
Yeah.
I think the number one reason why um, like MS Access and Microsoft Projects and whatever some of these more specific tools aren't used is because maybe the collaboration features aren't as great. Like if you have Excel online, it's actually pretty easy to collaborate with like your teammates in Excel, like in a browser. But I don't know if
Right.
Project and Access are. I think like Microsoft is not even like supporting Access anymore. But I think these tools are just
Got
like
it.
harder to collaborate in. And since now like we're in just distributed environments and people are always like, how do I work across time zones and locations? Collaboration is like a really key need for any tool.
Right. So I think you had some comments on Excel specifically for project management. What are the like what functionality is Excel missing, or what do like teams lose if they are using Excel for project management?
Well, if you let's say you're using Excel online, so you are kind of collaborating with in Excel, I think you're missing a lot of things in terms of um, like a really common feature or aspect of project management is like task management. And so with task
Right.
management, you have things like notifications, due dates, um, like completion and progress of like a given task. These things are all capable. You can kind of hack it together in Excel, but it doesn't look super pretty compared to like dedicated project management tools, or it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that you'll need. So you're kind of like hacking
Yeah.
your way around managing a project in Excel, and so you're just kind of like you're like you have a table with three legs. It's like you can do it. You could eat on this table, but some food might fall off on the side, and you have to deal with that
Right.
spill. So,
To talk about the push and pull of information, right?
mm-hmm.
So on notifications specifically, right? If you have an Excel spreadsheet and you change, like say it's a CRM, it's all your potential new customers, and you decide to assign a specific customer, I assign Al to this customer. In the spreadsheet, there's no notification that triggers to Al saying you've been assigned this customer.
Hmm.
So a notification like that is a push, right? Al doesn't have to do anything to get an update from the system. Rather, if we use Excel and not a project management tool, Al will only know that something has been assigned to him if he pulls, which means he has to remember to go check this spreadsheet. And that's just another task to do every day. So pull just requires more effort on your team. So if you're missing deadlines or people don't know what's assigned to them or they don't know what order in which they should be doing their tasks, it's because Excel doesn't help you at all with that functionality, and you want to take advantage of the push features so that people know something new has happened or something has changed or transpired, so the collaboration can continue and the ping pong of communication keeps going.
Right. I mean, with Excel Online and also Word Online, I mean, you can have like comments within like a cell, and like you can leave comments with each other. So if
Yeah,
I app mention Lindsay in a cell, like, you'll get a notification, a push notification saying like
sure.
Al has mentioned you in this comment or whatever. But yeah, to your
Yeah,
point, I don't think.
but you have to do it and you have to do
Right.
it correctly.
Exactly.
And every team member has to remember to do it that way versus having some automations built in.
Right.
So anything a team member has to remember to do, um, and there's no forcing function to make it happen,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that can fall between the cracks.
100%. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So, for listeners currently managing projects in on Wildly spreadsheets, like how can they transition? Or for listeners that are like, oh yeah, my team is using Excel way too much, like how can we start to move our teams away from the spreadsheet?
Believe it or not, I think there's really two options, and maybe I mean maybe there's some things in between, but you could just do the band-aid approach and just pull it off and be like, IT could be like, hey, we're going to start using Asana for doing all our projects now. We're going to start using whatever ABC project management tool. And so it's kind of like a rip and replace where you're just kind of like migrating all of your data from Excel into this new project management tool, and everyone's forced to swim in the deep end and figure out how to use it.
Mhm.
What
That would be
That would be
messy.
very messy. It requires change management, implementation, consultants, blah 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 blah. The other alternative, which I think happens usually for most companies, is back to the shadow IT, where you have some enterprising
Hmm.
individual in the company who's like, I'm pretty sure we can use a better project management tool than using Excel. And so he or she would spin up like whatever, let's say Asana, and they
Yeah.
would start managing a small portion of their project in Asana, like in tandem in parallel with the Excel file their team is using. And then over time, as they kind
Hmm.
of test that this system works, they could then present this to their team saying, hey guys, I just picked up this random tool. I think it's going to be better for a use case. Here's how it works. Here's why it's better for a project. And then it's a better kind of like sell internally to migrate off of Excel into this project management tool. So I think that's probably the most common way that folks move off of Excel for not just project management, for any kind of use case where Excel is not the best tool.
Yeah, I think you're right. For a small organization, a startup team, it's easy for, one project to just kind of move over to Asana or Monday or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage for people that work at bigger companies, there are probably tools that your company pays for that might do the job better. And I always encourage you to look at those technologies before going to find like another one. And I also advise that to startup founders that I coach and work with. Spend an hour getting to know Slack more before you add another communication tool,
Hmm.
right? If you feel like Asana, you're not getting the most out of it, spend an hour going through the tutorials and to really confirm that nothing is there, that the features aren't there before you try to bring in another tool into your
Hmm.
stack.
Yep, that's a good way of looking
Yeah.
at it.
So it is very hard to move away from spreadsheets because people are just so comfortable using them. This is kind of tongue in cheek, but any advice for an Excel addict in search of recovery?
I don't know if I have good advice for that because I still use Excel, even though um, I mean, I work at a company where we're somewhat trying to replace Excel in certain ways, but there's really, I feel like once you're an Excel user, you're always an Excel user. And because that's what you learned on. I mean, I learned on Excel version 2003, to be honest, to be perfectly frank. And I still remember all the shortcuts and the menus from like learning this tool like 20 years ago. But I think just having a curiosity for learning new tools is probably the biggest advice I'd give if you really want to just see the world outside of Excel, because there are so many tools now, SaaS tools, that can do um, things that Excel can't do, but it can probably
Yeah.
give you the data, the visualizations that you need. So I think it's more about just like having curiosity and not being stuck in your old patterns and ways of doing things in Excel. Because we all hate change, we all hate learning new things if we're comfortable with things that we already know about. But I think just always being willing to challenge yourself and having curiosity over um, what's out there is probably a
Yeah.
good way to think about it.
I like to say leaders are learners,
Hmm.
right? So jump in there and look for other tools. Just next time you power up that green icon, think about whether it's really the right next step for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would recommend one good resource for those of you who are not like coming from the startup world is Product Hunt, a great website. Every day
Hmm.
there's new startups, companies
Great.
launching their product or service on Product Hunt, and every week there's at least one product which is like trying to replace some feature in Excel or some uh, use case in Excel. And those are the really interesting ones because you're when I look at these tools, I'm like, oh, you're right. Like Excel could do this, but this tool does it way better. It's more modern, and yeah, it's like a better alternative. And so those kind of tools, when they launch, make me really think about like, oh, okay, like this is why Excel is not the best tool for XYZ use case.
100%. 100%. What do you think the spreadsheet crutch says about other enterprise software tools?
You mean like how how Excel interacts with these other tools?
I think kind of like that the other tools don't do their job, or the other tools are too clunky,
Hmm.
or simply put, employees weren't trained on how to use the other tools.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the this goes back to we talked about like just being intuitive to use,
Hmm.
usability, and for me, it's actually speed. The speed of being able to move data around and structure data in Excel. Just you can't it doesn't compete with any other SaaS tool because with SaaS there's like a server, client, and there's always going to be a lag
Hmm.
sometimes. So I think the speed in which you can kind of put your vision of the world inside Excel, it just makes things so much faster. But yeah, I think there are other enterprise tools just don't have that flexibility that Excel does, and that's why you still see so many enterprise tools have the ability, give you the ability to export your data into a CSV or into an Excel format because at some point down the line, some analyst, some operations person is going to have to analyze the data coming from that enterprise tool. And guess what tool they use to analyze data? It's Excel. So
It's
it's
Excel.
yeah. An example I can share internally is that we use Salesforce as our CRM, and everyone hates Salesforce. It's like it's slow, it's clunky.
Can I just interrupt
Sure.
you real
Yeah.
quick? I was having this conversation with my sister too, specifically about Salesforce last night. And if she's listening, she's probably going to crack up. But like, I've been saying for almost 8, 9 years that Salesforce is a virus that enters maybe just your arm, one department at a company, and then somehow it spreads throughout the entire body and just takes over, and not necessarily in a good way.
Right.
So now keep telling us about how Salesforce is used at your organization.
Well, it's the single source of truth, the center of truth for all of our customer data or opportunities. The whole shebang. But when we want to report on how our pipeline's looking and um, what our opportunities look like, there's still some export being done into a spreadsheet or a table. And that speaks to the fact that Salesforce is not the best tool sometimes for visualizing your sales data. It's not the fastest tool for visualizing your sales data, but it's still the single source of truth. So it's kind of this tension
Hmm.
of like, I want to be able to see the data. I want to be able to see my sales data in a certain way. I don't want to fight Salesforce to be able to visualize data. So back to the path of least resistance. I'm just going to export into Excel, do the pivot tables, the charts that I know how to do, and just get my work.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I talk about enterprise software a lot, the tools people use at work. It's a recurring theme on Make Sense because I believe its ineffectiveness both drives macro system level problems and the micro daily frustrations most employees have with their jobs. So
Mm-hmm.
despite investments in digital transformation, some companies just really still rely on Excel. And I think it's mostly just human nature at the end of the day. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, most people just want to do their job, get paid, and go home, and like not have to think about innovating on what internal tool I'm going to use to track my projects. So
Right.
it's a little
Right.
bit of human nature. It's a little bit of like people just want to get their job done, and
Necessity.
whatever I can do to get my job done the fastest, I will do that. Um, and so, but
Hmm.
again, there are people internally who think beyond like just doing their job. It's like, how can I work smarter, not harder? How can I drive innovation within my team? Those are the people who are looking at
Right.
product hunt, checking out new tools, and challenging themselves and their teams on like, what can I do to improve my internal processes? But most people just want to
Right.
do their job. So that,
Do their
yeah, and
job.
that's why Excel will never die.
Right. Right. I think it's interesting. The observation that I have is that you have some enterprise system, like you were talking about Salesforce, it's clunky or it's inflexible, doesn't provide the visualizations you want. So we start to export data, create the visualizations we want. A startup comes by and says, man, these people are still doing this thing in Excel. So I'm going to build a tool so that they can do it better, faster, whatever. So they get some legs, they get into organizations, but they too have to keep growing, and they eventually become the big bloated enterprise software system that is no longer responsive to modern demands. And the cycle of exporting a CSV to do your work kind of starts again. So we're in this cycle. We're in this cycle, and I'm like, is there an end? I'm not sure because enterprise software teams just have such a hard time following through on projects. Just digital transformation projects stagnate, leaders leave, and then your average workers just Excel is that reliable friend that is always there for
Right.
you.
Yeah. I think we talked about this during our first call, which was the cycle you mentioned, where there's like originally in the early '90s and maybe late '80s, like Microsoft Office and I guess Google Suite to a certain extent bundled everything together that you would need for like enterprise software. Like you might still have Salesforce, you might still have Oracle for like your accounting purposes, but there really wasn't anything else besides Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And then going
Hmm.
into the 2010s and up to current, you have an explosion of SaaS tools. I think like we have like when we talk to our customers for my company, like I think we have like some stat where like most companies have like over 400. The average like enterprise has like over 400 SaaS tools and software,
Yes.
and so like
Yes. I've seen something like that
yeah, so
too.
we're in this part of the cycle now where there's too many SaaS tools, too many point solutions for some specific purpose, for hiring, for planning, for project management, for OKRs. And eventually the pendulum will swing back in the other direction where we need kind of like an all-in-one like tool like Excel that can or Office that can handle really flexible use cases. So
Yeah.
it's always going to, I think the pendulum is always going to swing back and forth. And um, yeah, that's kind of just my reaction to what you just said.
For anyone interested in understanding the enterprise software challenges, but also getting some hope and optimism for the future, the podcast episode with Berman Painter talks about composable architecture, which is a movement in the digital IT world to enterprise IT world to break down systems into their discrete functionalities so that we can kind of combine them like we do Lego sets. That's the example I use. So, so that teams can produce new applications on the fly on top of all the data. So someone could potentially come in and do visualizations that your company
Mm-hmm.
needs on top of the data. Could you tell us a little bit before we wrap up a little bit about Dear Analyst and kind of what you focus on there? Maybe some recent newsletters or episodes of your own podcast that you think are pretty cool?
Sure, it's newsletter slash podcast. When I first started it during COVID, it was really just me talking about Excel and Excel tips and tricks. Looking back, I was like very naive. I thought it'd be cool. I just want to try it out. I feel like every millennial had a podcast back then. But looking back, I'm thinking actually the audio medium was not the best medium for explaining Excel tips and tricks because you're like looking at a spreadsheet. Probably having YouTube videos and whatever is better. Anyways, it started off as just being me talking about Excel and Google Sheets, tips, tricks. And then over time, I started meeting people who work in the data world, data analysts, data engineers, scientists, and even all the way down to software engineers, and just talking to them and learning about different data projects they've worked on. And I really dive deep into different projects and the tools they use, techniques they applied, the impact that the analysis or tool had on their company. And it's just an exploration of the data world, so to speak. But I get super nerdy and I really like ask about like, no, how did you actually sort the data to make sure it was in the right format to get it, export it into this other tool and make sure the integration worked. Like that to me is like that kind of stuff to me is super interesting. So if you're really into the weeds and like knowing how stuff actually gets put together from a data perspective, this newsletter and podcast is for you. I think one of my favorite episodes was um, talking to she was at the time the lead data person on product analytics at Peloton. And this was right
Okay.
after COVID. So you have all these people who bought
Yes.
Pelotons, the bike, to use internally, to use at their home. And she was in charge of basically trying to figure out how to take the data that was coming from all these people riding their Pelotons and figure out what new features to add to the app on the tablet, on the bike, on your phone. And what was interesting was when I first reached out to her, she was still working at Peloton and she couldn't talk to me because Peloton's PR team is like way more than I can handle.
Hmm.
But eventually she left Peloton and was able to share and spill the beans on everything she worked on that she could share. And so it was just really interesting because I was a avid Peloton user during COVID. Everyone had to, find some way to exercise. And so I'm really familiar with the app. We're really familiar with the data that comes out of it. And she really kind of shined a light on how Peloton internally thought about how to shape the app to meet the needs of the user during COVID and post COVID. So it's just really interesting hearing like how these really big companies, software companies, think about using our data, um,
Yeah.
our data, quote unquote, to shape the product going forward.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I use Peloton mostly as a guest on my sister's account on my
Yep.
phone. Meditate, outdoor walking, love it. But what, 2 years ago, they wiped out their entire digital team, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
Uh, so to so to call it a big software company, like they have an identity crisis. And I know they've been trying to get more product people in to continue the innovation and the product features. They got to figure something out because there's only so many people that can buy their treadmills and bikes. So
Right. Yeah. It.
I think it'll be super interesting. I'm gonna have to look up that podcast episode and we'll make sure to have it in the show links.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Were you gonna say
Oh no, I mean I think if that kind of content around like internal data analytics is interesting to you, this is the podcast and newsletter that you might find interesting. And I never like I don't monetize it in any way. I just do stuff and talk to people I think are interesting and are working on interesting projects. I'll leave with one more example. I think it was maybe 2 episodes ago. I came across this guy. He works at BuzzFeed. He is a Swiftie, Taylor Swift fan that I've learned,
yep?
and he did this analysis, taking data from the Spotify API to figure out which Taylor Swift songs across her entire discography are most underrated. And
Huh.
it's like an impossible problem to like impossible question to answer from just like a human perspective. It's like I might have my favorite
Sure.
Taylor Swift song, you might have your favorite underrated Taylor Swift song, and he uses data to try to approach the problem. And so we walked
Hmm.
through the analysis, how he pulled the data from the API, crunched the data in R, used like a ggplot package in R to output the visualizations.
So
Yeah, yeah. And
nerdy.
so like just to give you an idea of like how deep we get, like this is the kind of stuff that I talk about and write about on the podcast and the newsletter. Um, but it's like these people are. You think of a data analyst as someone who just like behind their desk crunching numbers and writing
Yeah.
reports and whatever. But it's actually a very creative process, and he walks through like how he had to think about like how do I put Taylor's face on this chart so that it looks nice, and it's um it's fun to talk about those kind of things, the intersection of like music and data and popular culture.
I'm thinking about a bunch of my own old projects, but we're getting away from Excel at this spreadsheet.
Yeah,
So Um, let's make it make sense. There are better tools to use than Excel in most places. You need to know the pros and cons when you use Excel. Cons being, maybe you don't get to push as much information to your teammates, the communications aren't there, and of course, data may be updated in there, but the not where the company needs you to put it.
right.
So thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tavis, and my guest, Al Chen. We hope you enjoyed our take on the spreadsheet crutch. Al, Dear Analyst is on LinkedIn. Where else can people find you online?
LinkedIn is probably where I hang out the most. Big believer in creating content, so find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to see what I'm working on. I'm very kind of open to working in public, so you'll see a lot of the projects I work on there as well. And feel free to connect with me there as well.
Awesome. So, as always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes, including a list of the top 10 clips from the first 30 episodes. We're actually on episode like 52 now, so maybe I need to update that top 10. So, dive into the most insightful clips without having to watch a full episode by visiting lindsayt.com/ms top 10. Final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits. On YouTube, hit that subscribe for next week's episode. And for audio only, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Al, for joining
Thank you
me.
so much for having me.